Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. We're going to address a few different topics now, starting with the Horizon system itself. If we could bring onto screen your witness statement, WITN 111-80100, and it's paragraph 17, page 5. You set out there a number of issues that you have with Horizon. Is it right to say that you started using Horizon when your franchise first began in 2014?
Yes.
Let's go through briefly those issues that you've raised. The first is that it's not a visual and user-friendly system. You say the system is primarily text-based and there are a few command prompts. Second, it's difficult for postmasters to analyze data and correct potential inaccuracies in the system. It takes significant effort and often a manual review of transactions to investigate a potential error. Does that tie into one of the issues you raised with your investigation and the access to information?
Yes, there's two parts there. Firstly, the investigation being as discussed, but also out the back of that, the lessons learned from my side was we now have our own manual checks that's done in every branch, on every till, every day, off of Horizon to verify our balances.
And I think you've said in your witness statement that you do that because of concerns that you have with the post office's tolerance for error. Is that right?
Well, the tolerance is 0.
And what's your concern in that respect?
There's no system that can be wrong 0% of the time.
Looking at C, postmasters that run multiple branches cannot obtain a global view of data and are required to be physically present at the relevant post office to interrogate data. So you run a number of different branches, but there's no way of drawing all of your data together?
No, there's no central access that's available in real time. You can get delayed information weeks or days later, potentially, depending on the time of the month, using a system called Branch Hub. But this has limited data. You can't drill individual transactions. The only way to get individual data or analysis on an error is to drive to the branch, walk in the front door, print it out, and then by hand wade through a printed report. There's no Excel export or anything like that.
And then D, the Horizon IT system is effective as a functioning till, but it is not sufficiently sophisticated to manage and analyze a modern business as a professional postmaster. Is that along the same lines as you've just been describing?
Indeed. The rest of my business is all operated on a software platform that I can drill and analyze everything, and this is nothing like that.
Could we go to our expert report? That's EXPG 607, page 19. Page 19 sets out the issues experienced with Horizon in the last 12 months that postmasters have experienced. Are these issues that are familiar to you at all?
They would be familiar to every postmaster.
Looking at these issues and also the issues that you've highlighted in your witness statement, do you consider that they are sufficiently well known within the business?
Explain the question, sorry.
You're aware of them because you are a sub-postmaster and you operate branches. Those who completed the inquiries survey are aware of them because they are also sub-postmasters. Do you think that that information and those messages reaches the upper levels of the company?
No.
And what's the issue there?
They never touched Horizon.
And does one have to personally use Horizon to understand those issues, or is there a way of communicating that to the board or to executives that you don't see happening?
I think it's hard to realise how archaic the system is unless you have the privilege of using it. And I think what Mr. Ismail and myself bring to the board is that level of real-world experience where we can share the realities of operating within the confines of this system and other processes that we have in the organisation, this just being part of that. But I think that more could be done to immerse senior leaders within the business and board members in understanding how hard it is to run a branch.
In terms of the Horizon replacement, the NBIT system, When do you realistically think that that will be implemented?
I would suggest you speak to the head of technology.
Do you have any concerns about the implementation?
It's late, very late.
Do you have any concerns over and above the delay?
Yes, I think that it's very important we don't just get a Horizon replacement. This business doesn't need a replacement for Horizon. It needs a fit-for-purpose computer system that will be capable of managing the business 20 years from now, 15 years from now, because whatever we build for now is going to have to last beyond a decade.
Is that properly understood at executive level or board level?
I think it's beginning to be. But at the moment, it's often referred to as Horizon replacement. It's not. New branch IT is not a great name for it, but it's a better description of what it needs to be.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to Project Phoenix and past roles. I've dealt with that in great detail with Mr. Ismail, so we'll skip through a number of documents relatively quickly. But please do, if you want to take time over any of the documents, please do say. If we start, please, with poll 00448-615. This is a group executive report on the past roles review, dated the 17th of January 2024. Could we please turn to page 6? In your witness statement, I think you've said that you were originally lined up for a role in this work. Sorry, it's over the page 6. Can you assist us with that? We have here, for example, Mark Eldridge listed as the postmaster non-executive director.
Well, in the original draft that I was sent, I was assigned as the postmaster Ned to that committee.
And what happened to that?
The process went through a number of different iterations, and the final constitution of the group didn't include me.
Are you aware of any reasons for that?
It wasn't communicated to me directly. I was led to believe that it could be because I was a postmaster and therefore might be conflicted.
Who is Mr. Eldridge then? Is he not a postmaster?
He is indeed a postmaster. He is the postmaster director.
So why is it that his name is there and yours isn't?
You would have to ask the chair of the panel, I suppose.
What reason do you think it is?
I don't know, if I'm honest. Mark's role within the business is more executive. I'm non-executive. Everyone else on that committee is executive. Perhaps it was felt that it was an executive committee rather than a non-executive committee.
Do you think that the concerns that you've raised in respect of that project has played a role in any way?
I don't believe we'd have moved forward in the way we are now moving forward if myself and Mr. Ismail had not been very forceful and repeated in our requests to get this sorted.
Could we please turn to poll 00448-309? This is just one of the emails that we've been through. We've been through a great deal of correspondence on the Phoenix and past roles issue. This is an email from yourself sent on the 10th of February 2024, and you say, it does, however, seem odd that not a single one is suspended whilst this is ongoing. Why is that? We seem to suspend people on a regular basis when investigations are ongoing. Why not this matter? What's your concern in relation to the suspension or lack of suspension of individuals?
So I've had the privilege to attend this inquiry on a number of days and see other witnesses give evidence, some of whom were involved in investigations in the past, some of whom remain in the organisation today. And I don't understand how you can change the culture of an organization and those people still be taking a wage from the business. And so it was my view that whether or not we could deal with that now because the inquiry is going on, or whether we should wait until the inquiry ended, these people had to be not within the business on a daily basis. And if the only way to deal with that now was to suspend them on full pay, I would rather they were paid and sat at home than be in the organisation creating a culture that isn't fit.
And where do you draw the line between particular named individuals, individuals who are in particular roles, etc.?
So you made an example this morning of someone who had reappeared in a different role in a communication at a post office that had been closed. Part of the problem of the organisation is that up until recently, it didn't know who or when people who are in the business currently may have been involved in the past behaviour of the organisation. And so the Phoenix / past roles process was about understanding who we have in the organisation, what they were doing in the past when we made such terrible decisions, and what are they doing now, and what's the risk. Now, there are some people, and Phoenix, it latterly turns out, because, again, we talked earlier about board communication. Phoenix and past roles were only ever referred to as Phoenix at the board up until recently, when they were more clearly defined as two separate projects. But Phoenix is designed to identify what were known as the Reds being people who are very high risk category 1, people involved in investigations who, are clearly should not be in the organisation, as opposed to people who perhaps were employed by the organisation at the time when we were doing these things, but were not directly involved. They may have been in a completely different department. They might even have worked in one of our directly managed branches at the time and now are in a position of leadership. That's totally different to someone who was directly involved in investigations. So for me, that's the first distinction. And I don't believe we should blanket remove everyone who was there on the date, but we need to understand who works for us and what was their role in the past. And if it was to do such wrong things, they have no place in this organisation yesterday, today or tomorrow.
Can we please look at poll 004482997? This email we've just seen was February moving to 19th of April. We saw this document either yesterday or today. Over the past couple of days, a number of postmasters have been in contact with SAF and I in regard to recent statements at the inquiry by current employees who are still in the business and were involved in the Horizon scandal. We are regularly told that review is underway. It must be done carefully to ensure accuracy in decision-making, which I fully understand, but to date we have not received any information on a single employee who has been suspended or dismissed as a result of this ongoing review, which started nearly 2 years ago, but still remains incomplete. What's your view as to the pace of these investigations?
They weren't moving.
And are they moving now?
They are, but not sufficiently quickly, in my opinion.
And who do you consider to be responsible for that lack of pace?
Well, it's been incredibly difficult because we've had, I lose count, I think it's 5 or 6 chief people officers whilst I've been at the organisation, which is very hard to build culture, very hard to build a process, and where something like this is being managed, I believe, by the people team now. Karen McEwen, who's copied in on this email and is the current Chief People Officer, has taken up activity on this at a far better pace than previously. But I think without the push and continuous push from me and Mr. Ismail and others on the board, then it would just be going at the slow pace.
Why has there been such great turnover in terms of the people officers?
Well, there was one of them went on maternity leave. One was an interim cover for maternity leave. That person then did a short-term interim role and left. We had another one that joined, and she had her contract terminated for performance, I believe. And we've had gaps between them as well. And now Karen has been with us, I'm not sure how long, maybe nearly a year perhaps.
Do these signify any wider problems within the business in terms of retention, in terms of consistency and handover?
Well, in an organisation of any size, the people team is fundamental in building, not only assisting in the CEO to deliver the culture change that you want to deliver, but also in helping to build out the skill and capability in the second-tier leadership so that you have continuity and capability as you continue to grow and evolve your business. Not having a chief people officer or a people team that was under a steady leadership obviously has affected our ability to make change, I think.
We saw yesterday a couple of documents that seemed to put a lot of emphasis on the duties owed to employees. And that was given perhaps as a reason for not suspending people. Are you aware of the emphasis being placed on care to employees over and above wider issues?
I'm aware of the suggestion. It doesn't stack for me. Suspending someone and sacking someone are very different. And you're not making a judgment on their guilt by suspending them whilst you investigate.
And is it your current view that there should be a move towards suspension?
Well, I'd like to see us a move towards removing anyone who's classified as Phoenix.
Moving on to Project Pineapple, and again, we've seen these emails quite a lot, so we'll move through them quite rapidly. Can we first turn to poll 004483002, and it's page 4. Page 4 is the note of the conversation. I think I can actually clarify the date now. It seems to have been sent by Henry Staunton on Sunday, January the 14th. Mm-hmm. And if we scroll slightly above, we can see a further email from Mr. Staunton saying, Dear both, thank you for your time today. So it does seem as though the date actually of that note and the conversation is the 14th of January. Is that your understanding?
It was definitely the weekend. I think it was a Sunday night, yeah.
Thank you. You've confirmed, if we scroll up onto the second page, that it was a fair reflection of your discussion, and then you add further detail.
Yes, I mean, it was designed as an internal aid memoir rather than some, document that would be released for general public review.
And when it was provided to those beyond the non-executive director teams, what was your view of that?
It was a mess.
Were you aware that it was going to the CEO?
I think the intention was that Mr. Staunton would share it with the non-execs first. To be clear, Henry had a conversation with the two of us, and this was off the back of Richard Taylor being shared in the press about some recording of him making comments about postmasters all being guilty. But we'd had a conversation with Henry, and Henry was very conscious of this two-tiering of the board and said, look, I don't want there to be silos of information. I want this to be a flat board, and part of that is to make sure, certain that the other NEDs know what we've talked about. Do you have any problem with me sharing it with the NEDs so that they're on the same page as you and get a sense of what we've talked about? And we were like, absolutely, no problem. And I think the intention was once the NEDs were aware, we'd share it with the Chief Executive, Nick Reed.
Did you ever intend for it to be shared with Ben Fote or Martin Roberts?
Not in its format, though the content was true.
If we turn, please, to poll 00448383. we start on the third page, we see the email there from Mr. Staunton, confirming that it had been sent on. There's reference there, I think, to an apology. Was there an apology to you from Mr. Reid?
So I spoke with Mr. Reid after the incident occurred, and Henry had said to me, give Nick a call, let's sort this out. You know, he's very apologetic for what's happened. So I gave Mr. Reid a call. He didn't apologise in so many words, no.
If we turn to the first page, please. We see there you say, you strongly echo SAF's view on this. The release of the confidential briefing notes to the very people we've highlighted in the document is a horrendous breach of trust. You then go on to say, your description of these three men, that's John Bartlett, Ben Fote, and Martin Roberts, as untouchable in our call earlier today was worrying enough. Just pausing there, what did you understand the term untouchable to be a reference to?
So we had a non-executive director only meeting, and Nick Reid was in the meeting for the first part of it, during which we were talking about many things, and Mr. Reid made reference to the investigations team and the others who were around that, so Fote and Roberts, being untouchable because he couldn't deal with anything with them. He was under investigation at the time, so was Henry, and at this point I don't think I'd received my release, so I was under investigation as well, and I think there were others on the board under investigation as well. Jane Davis was under investigation. The list was quite lengthy.
Could the board properly function during that period?
It could carry out its board functions in terms of its day-to-day board roles, but when it came to dealing with specifics around any investigation or seeming to get in the way of any investigation, clearly everyone was conflicted, so it became difficult. Therefore, they were untouchable.
Could we please turn to poll 00448301? This is again a message from Mr. Staunton. This is the reference there at the end to Nick being under huge pressures and was very apologetic. Were you aware of Mr. Reid being under huge pressures at that point in time?
January was an incredibly high-pressure month for the Post Office. It was, 14 days since the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office broadcast, which had, I think, surprised the Post Office how strong the feeling nationally had been. And the output from that was incredibly intense on Mr. Reid and others, but particularly on Mr. Reid. I think he was called to a select committee around this time as well.
Was it a surprise to you? You've said that the Bates drama was a surprise to the company. As a sub-postmaster, was it a surprise to you?
Sadly not.
Were there others on the board who it did not come as a surprise to, so far as you are aware?
I think seeing something portrayed in the drama brings to life what you've read or what you've heard in a way that is indescribable. And I think the reaction from the public just shows the truth of what happened. And I think everyone on the board felt a much deeper sense of a need to get this right. And it just elevated everything in terms of making certain that things moved forward. So I think the two things that have made a massive difference over the last few years have been the inquiry, which has been both helpful and challenging, and the drama, which has been incredibly powerful.
Could we please turn to poll 00448514? This is again an email that we saw yesterday with Mr. Ismail. I'll just take you to the second page. Over the page, please. It's the email from Mr. Roberts, where he says that he would now ask that you please put in writing the apology and retract all the allegations and statements presented in the email that he was copied in on. Why, in your view, have things broken down so badly that there is this bickering at the highest levels of the post office?
When I met with Mr. Roberts, which was a few days prior, I think it was the day before this email, actually. It was the 30th of January. We'd had a very positive and collaborative conversation. Saf and I met with him together, face to face. We shook hands at the end. It was a good meeting, and I think we all left thinking that we had settled the boat. And I was surprised to receive this email, but I understood where it came from. Mr. Roberts had been very stressed and concerned by the comments we'd raised. He shared that with us in the meeting. And I think reputationally he felt he'd been damaged. And this was him requesting that restoration of reputation.
And I think you say on the first page that essentially while you would have put it differently, the substance of your complaint remained the same. Is that right?
Yes. The file note that Henry wrote was a rapid-fire internal document. Were it to have been shared as a performance review, I would have drafted it differently.
Could we please turn to poll 00448384? We went through the drafting process with Mr. Ismail yesterday, or this morning, in relation to the points below this. If we scroll down, we can see key agenda items for upcoming board meeting. We understand, I think, that Mr. Staunton was dismissed shortly after this.
Yes.
If we scroll up to the top, we can see Mr. Staunton had said, Elliot, I think you were going to raise a number of these issues with Nick. His responses would help Saf finalise his note. How would you like me to take this forward? Can you assist us with how that matter was taken forward?
Well, I think Henry was dismissed before we could actually take this any further forward, as my memory recalls.
Did you discuss it with Mr. Reid?
No.
And why not?
In my call with Mr. Reid, I was quite surprised by his reaction to my call. I was expecting, well, if I had made the error that he made in forwarding a confidential document to a party that shouldn't have seen it, I would have been very humble and apologetic, offered to put it right if I could, try and broker some sort of situation with the people who had been forced to read something out of context. But Mr. Reid didn't offer any of those things, and in fact suggested it was Henry's fault for forwarding it in a unsecured format, along with other documents that caused it. And it so threw me, his response, that I didn't think there was any point in discussing it further.
What do you think was behind that response?
You would have to ask Mr. Reid.
Is it once again bickering at the top level? Is this Mr. Reid and Mr. Staunton?
It's interesting because Mr. Reid and Mr. Staunton have a lot of like history. They're both retailers from successful careers. And on the face of it, I thought they had a pretty good relationship. But I'm not sure that it ended up that way.
The final substantive topic that I'm going to deal with very shortly is the Grant Thornton reports that we saw earlier today. I won't take you through those reports, we've already been through them, but what for you is the most important message from those reports?
The Grant Thornton report?
Yes.
So the Grant Thornton report was produced on the request of Henry Staunton when he was chair. And Henry was very keen to get governance back in line with where it needed to be. The Grant Thornton report, in its initial draft, was very damning of our governance capabilities, and rightly so. It was softened a little bit in the redraft, I think, because it was felt to be awkward and difficult, and I think it raised very important issues which are at the heart of what this inquiry is trying to get to the bottom of.
Who was responsible for pushing forward changes to that report?
Well, at the time, Mr. Staunton had been dismissed. We had an interim chair, and it fell to the interim chair, Ben Tidswell, to lead the activity on that. I'm not sure of all of the elements, but my understanding was that Ben Tidswell, and I would expect probably the CEO and Lorna Grattan were involved in those discussions. I was less involved in that.
Thank you. And finally, is there any matter that we haven't addressed or any particular recommendations that you consider are appropriate that we haven't addressed today that you would like to raise?
I think the Post Office is an amazing organisation with great people within it, but it isn't living up to what it should be. It works best if it's given a clear prescription, and it needs this inquiry to give it its prescription. It can be a great organisation, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. So there are no questions from core participants, unless you have any questions, sir.
It's really out of curiosity more than the likelihood that I need precise answers from you. But could we go back to the investigation that took place in relation to your branches, simply to fill in a gap in my that I think is should be filled? By my reckoning, we've had evidence from you of the interview, I'll call it an interview, on the 5th of April, and then the audit which took 5th of April, and the audit which took place on the 6th of April. And then we've kind of jumped to January the next year.
Yes.
And, well, I mean, I'd just like you to tell me briefly what actually happened.
So, thank you, sir. So between the audit, post-audit, they then passed the work over to the team at Chesterfield, who then worked with us on...
Sorry to stop you. When you say they, you mean the two investigators who'd interviewed you, yeah?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so that I can sort of trace this in the way I want to, essentially, am I right to infer that they did that because of the answers that you gave them in the interview? Or did something else happen?
I would assume that to be the case. I was never told why, but I wasn't asked back for a second interview. No.
Right, so interview's over, audit's over. Presumably you raise a dispute about what had happened over the stamps.
And the other balances, yeah.
Yeah. And then the next thing that happens is that a different team is looking at it.
Yes, and we went through with that team line by line forensically over 44 pages of what was a PDF file and dealt with them line by line by line.
And that's what you meant when you were describing what must have been a series of meetings, I guess, which were much more like business meetings rather than interviews.
Indeed.
Okay, and that took the better part of the rest of the year. Yeah.
No, I don't recall the exact period, but I think the whole thing was wrapped up probably by September, but it took until the next year for someone in legal to issue me a letter saying that they'd closed it.
Yeah. And so you are, I think, asking me to accept that it all having been wrapped up as between the business people, if I can put it in that way, by September 2020, whatever it was.
3.
The delay thereafter was in getting legal to sign it off.
Well, it was, I think it would be fair to say that the company required it to go through a number of governance steps because they didn't want it to be seen as, you know, a non-exec getting something signed off unfairly or improperly. It required a number of layers of approval. Those layers of approval were achieved, but the document never got written. And I think it was just, it went round the loop a few too many times and got lost on the way.
All right. So it's perfectly understandable that justice was being seen to be done as well as being done in your particular instance. So I follow that. So overall, would you say that taking, what is it, 7 or 8 months to resolve it from the point of the audit was reasonable or unreasonable in the particular circumstances prevailing?
I think it was an incredibly long period of time to wrap something up. If you can come next day for an audit, it shouldn't take 7 months to write a letter.
Right. Okay. Thank you for filling in the gaps, Mr. Jacobs.
My pleasure, sir.
That's all I have, Mr. Blake. So in the absence of any further questions, it just remains for me to thank you very much for making your witness statement and for giving evidence this afternoon. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you, sir. There's one small bureaucratic matter that I have to deal with, and that is one witness statement from phase 3 hasn't yet been read into the record, and I just want to, for the purposes of the transcript, confirm that a statement has been provided by Penny Thomas, and that can be found at WITN 00960100, and that is now in evidence in the inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake.
Thank you.
So we won't be sitting tomorrow, but we'll resume at 10 o'clock on Thursday, yeah?
Yes, that's with Mr. Greenhow.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.